Good morning. Thank you for attending. Today, I will present SQCpack alerting. Over the next 3 weeks, on Tuesday, we will present the other topics you see here. The webinar will be recorded, and this will be made available to you at our PQ user community. There's a link for that here. You can also get to this from a button within our software. I will also use the community to answer questions about this webinar that we present today. We're going to start by looking at a chart in SQCpack. I'll display this chart and we'll think about it for just a second. And then we'll learn a little bit about our alerting feature. So I want you to think about this control chart and think about this being a critical characteristic that some customer of yours worries a lot about. So the question I have for you is that if something goes terribly wrong here with bore depth while you're in the webinar today, how long will it take you to discover that fact and have the opportunity to do something about it? This data is flowing in automatically into a database that we have here in the office in a similar way that it might be flowing in from machines or from operators in your operation. So think about that while we talk about our alerting feature. I'll close the chart for now. So what is alerting? Alerting is an SQCpack feature that was added in 2018. And it provides two functions for you. The first one is monitoring, and the second one is notification. So we'll talk about each one of those. Monitoring is just paying attention when new data arrives. So that's what the monitoring piece of our alerting feature does. And what it does is look for points that are outside of the specifications or for points that are out of control on a control chart. So that's the monitoring side of alerting. The notification side is that when it detects these conditions, it will send messages to people. And we have three flavors of message that it might send. It may send an email to someone. It may send a text message to someone, one or more people. And it also has the ability to send an SQCpack to SQCpack's internal messaging system so that people who log into SQCpack will have a chance to see the notification. So how does alerting work in SQCpack? Well, SQCpack is the program that you and your operators interact with in a user interface, and we'll look at that in just a minute. The alerting service is a separate program from SQCpack, and it runs in the background, and it does these two jobs that we just talked about, the jobs of monitoring and notification. When you're running SQCpack, it coordinates and communicates with an alerting service. If the alerting service is connected right now to SQCpack, you'll see a green circle in the lower right corner of the SQCpack user interface. That just means that, hey, I know about an alerting service and we're synchronized with each other. Now, if you don't see the green circle, that's not necessarily an error. It just means that maybe your alerting service has not been configured or set up yet. So to learn more about setting up the alerting service, because I don't want to spend too much time on that in this webinar, I encourage you to open the help in SQCpack and look at the two topics that I've got highlighted here. In the top topic, you'll find out about setting up the alerting service. And in the bottom topic, you'll learn more about what I plan to cover today, and that is how to set up alerts and how to manage them over time. There is a slight difference if you're using a multi-user database versus a single user database in how you set up the alerting service. However, that's all covered in the documentation. And in addition to that, if you do have questions or you would like some assistance in doing this, you can contact our application support group and they'd be glad to walk you through this. So what you do to use the alerting service is create alert definitions. And you do that by selecting alerting from the SQCpack menu. When you do that, you will see your list of alerts that you've defined, and you'll be on the alerting page where you can add, edit, and delete alert definitions. And this is also where you can activate or deactivate alert definitions. So what is an alert definition? Well, to start with, it's just a name and description. And so you want to name that something that makes sense in your workflow. Often it will be a part number that is used for the name, but sometimes it will be a process variable that is known within your operation. Each alert definition has one or more alert items, and an alert item is really just a pointer to some chart that is in SQCpack. So SQCpack has charts, and they can be looking at data that's being put into SQCpack, or they can be looking at data that's arriving in some external data source, such as SQL Server or Excel. Every alert that you have in SQCpack will either be active or inactive. If it is active, that means that the alerting service is paying attention and doing the monitoring and notification work we talked about earlier. If it is inactive, it's just something that's available for future use. So we have customers who have many alert definitions, but at any one time, they may only have 3 or 4 of them running because that's what's being done in their operation at the moment. So I'll give you some guidance about using our alerting features, and then we'll look at SQCpack and see how you do this. The first bit of guidance is that it might be more flexible for you to have many different alerts where each one has a single alert item in it. That would be more flexible than having a single alert that has 20 items in it. Now, we allow for both because in some workflows, that's the best scenario. But generally speaking, you'll have more flexibility at starting and stopping alerts if you do it this way. The next bit of guidance is that you need to be aware of over-notifying people. So you can turn this on for everything, and you know the rule that if everything is important, then nothing is important. So as soon as some user gets one of these notifications and then ignores it because they've gotten so many, that's an indication that maybe you're over notifying. So we'll talk about how to fix that problem when we get into using the feature in just a minute. The other bit of guidance is that when you set up an alert, especially one on external data, you have the option to decide how often will I check to see if there is any new data. And you want to avoid doing that more often than what is necessary. So imagine that you take a sample from your process twice an hour. So maybe every 30 minutes or so, you take a sample from the process. Well, there's no need to set your alert up to check for new data every 10 seconds because that's just work that will not result in any notifications. So be careful about checking for data too often. Okay, so with that background, now we'll look at SQCpack and we'll do a bit of a demonstration about how alerting works. I will start by opening a data group that I have already defined, and it's one called bore diameter. We will look at that and just take a look at the data that we're recording from this. We've got an identifier called date, and we're recording a bore diameter every so often along with the date. So if I type in a number here, you can see that it will get added to the chart, and we're monitoring that over time. Now, let's say you want to alert on this particular chart. It's an important metric. It's one that you want to be aware of as soon as possible when something goes wrong. So how would you do that? We'll close this data group, and we will go to the menu, and we will select alerting. You can see I don't have any alerts defined, so we will create our new alert definition. So we'll select the new button and we'll give it a name. In this case, I'm just naming it after the metric that we plan to look at here, which is bore diameter. You could also enter a description here. I'll just put SQCpack data. The next thing you do is you select what do you want to monitor. And you have three choices: out of spec only, out of control only, or both out of spec and out of control. We'll select out of spec only. So that's the monitoring side that we talked about earlier. Next, you decide who will be notified about this. And you have three options here: SQCpack recipients, email, or text message. Just to make the demo a little bit easier in the webinar, we're going to use SQCpack recipients. And these are users of SQCpack who are entered into SQCpack and are able to use it. So I'm going to select the admin user because that's who I have logged in as. Another thing I'm going to do is check this button which says, when you send me a notification, I'd also like an image of the chart. So we've given it a name and we've told it what we want to monitor and who we want to notify. The next step is to decide what items or what charts in SQCpack we want to pay attention to. So I'll use the button here to add an alert item, and I'm going to use bore diameter, which we already looked at over in the data entry screen. So that's my alert item. Now you have some other options that you can set up, but that's sort of the minimum that we need. So we'll make sure this box is checked that says it's an active alert, and we'll save it. So it shows up in the list as an active alert. So the alerting service, which I talked about earlier, is now coordinating with SQCpack and paying attention to this particular metric when new data arrives. So let's go back now to the data groups list, and let's open up this group for data entry. And we're going to simulate an out of spec condition. So we can see from looking at this chart that the upper spec is 20. I'm going to enter in a value of 21. Now, before I press enter on this, I'd like you to focus either up here on the messages envelope, which is in the ribbon bar throughout SQCpack, or down at the bottom, which is a little area where we send notifications to you. And now I'm going to hit enter on this out of spec point. So the point turns red in the data entry, so that's an indication for the operator. But you may have noticed that the messages box lit up with a little sunburst icon on it, and also that we got a notification that we have one unread message. So imagine that you are out in the parking lot or in another office and you're running SQCpack and you get this notification. So you will open this up by clicking on it, and we see that we got a message. So I will double click to read that. The message states that bore diameter has had an out of spec condition, which is what we were monitoring for. It further gives you some information about the name of the group and the characteristic where this comes from, and it shows you an image of the chart so that you can see what happened. Now this message arrived here in SQCpack, but what I want you to think about is that you could be notified on your phone by a text message, or you could be notified by email, which would also show up on your phone. So that's the basic workflow of setting up and using an alert for SQCpack data. Now let's go back to our chart that we started with. This is a chart where the data is flowing into SQL Server. And I want to talk about how do we alert on this data, because it's slightly different. So we'll close that and we'll go back to alerting, and we will create one more alert. We're going to call this bore depth because it's a little different characteristic. We're going to notify also on out of spec like we did before. And we'll just use SQCpack recipients again because that's the easiest thing to do. And I will add that chart as an alert item, bore depth. So the other thing we have to do with this is set a polling interval, because this data is arriving outside of SQCpack. It's arriving over in SQL Server. So I'm going to say, you know, every 10 seconds, just so we don't have to wait, is long enough to pull on this particular data set. So I'm going to save this, and as soon as I do, you might look up here at messages because the data is flowing continuously and we may get a message right away. So now we have another alert set up, and we'll go back and look at that chart. And if we watch that for a few seconds, remember there's up to a 15-second delay here, we'll get a point that's out of spec, which we see here. And if we go to messages, we can see that we got another message, this one on bore depth. And if we look at it, we can see what has happened. We've got 2 points here out of spec, and it's described here in this list. So that's an overview of our SQCpack alerting feature. We're trying to keep these webinars short. So we'll make a recording of this available on our user community, and we will also answer questions on the user community for the next several minutes. So thank you very much for attending today. We hope you attend our next 3 Tech Tuesday webinars on each Tuesday in February. Thanks again and have a good afternoon.